smart, powerful, innovative, the best leader that Russia ever had. These are only some of the ways to describe the person who single-handedly changed the course of Russian history. He employed dramatic changes that turned Russia from an old-fashioned, backwards country into a world superpower. He increased its size, modernized its culture, and even established a government. But most importantly, this one individual built Russia's greatest city from the ground up. This man is Peter Alexeyevich, or better known as Peter the Great. Peter learned sorrow from a very early age. He was born near Moscow on June 9th, 1672. His father, Tsar Alexis Mikhailovich, died 4 years later. Peter's eldest brother, Fyodor, then became the Tsar and started ruling Russia. Fyodor suddenly died under unknown circumstances 6 years after that, when Peter was 10. This started an unstable time in the country when powerful families of Russia battled for the throne. The next in line to become Tsar was Peter's half-brother, Ivan V, who was not capable of fulfilling his duties because of physical and mental illnesses. Taking advantage of Ivan's condition and Peter's young age, their half-sister, Sophia, seized the power on the throne. To get rid of Peter, Sophia sent him and his mother to live in a small village away from Moscow. Peter's life was endangered several times because Sophia wanted to remove the last obstacle to the throne. Despite all of the death and turmoil of his childhood, Peter was determined to become the ruler of Russia. At Sophia's last attempt to kill Peter, he gathered support from the people and took what belonged to him. At the age of 17, in August of 1689, Peter Alexeyevich was crowned the sole Tsar of Russia. Ever since he was a child, Peter the Great was fascinated by ships and sailing. He was naturally a very curious person who loved to learn and work. This was very unusual for a person of his social position because Peter loved to make stuff with his hands. From a young age, Peter enjoyed learning new trades and skills. At that time, opportunities in Russia were very limited to non-existent, which is why Peter decided to go to Europe. Not wanting to attract attention, he traveled incognito as a ship's carpenter by the name of Peter Mikhailov. For 2 years he worked in English and Dutch shipyards, learning to build ships. At every opportunity he visited universities, museums, factories, and observatories. He studied everything from astronomy and engraving to European industrial techniques. Along his travels, he acquired tools and weapons that were unheard of in Russia. He also recruited talented engineers and scientists to teach in schools all over his country. This trip was the beginning of a new era for Russia. Throughout the 17th century, Russia was an undeveloped and backwards nation. They were stuck in their traditional ways and were against any change. Education and science were not appreciated, and people were strongly superstitious. People in Russia were suspicious and unwelcoming to foreign cultures. Peter saw these problems and began his economic, political, and cultural reforms. Before Peter the Great came to power, Russia's government was corrupt. It was made up of loosely connected districts that were governed by nearby cities. Peter transformed this scattered kingdom into one unified state. He established a 9-person Senate to govern the country. The Senate is still around today and is the highest judicial body in Russia. To fund the reforms, Peter needed resources. He reorganized the taxation system, and these new taxes were much higher than the ones they replaced. As a result, they allowed Russia's treasury to expand 6-fold. A large portion of the finances Peter acquired were invested in making Russia more modernized, following in Europe's footsteps. He began developing Russia's education system with emphasis on science and math. He built universities, medical, engineering, and military. Elementary schools were opened up all over Russia for people who couldn't afford education. Lots of books were translated from European languages into Russian and Peter even founded the first newspaper in Russian history. Peter the Great founded a new, easier alphabet, a modernized calendar, and doubled the number of books printed in Russia. To shake off century-old traditions and conservative way of life, Peter enforced a number of social reforms. One of the most drastic reforms was changing the appearance of Russian nobles. He made all men shave off their long beards, which was the norm of the Christian Orthodox religion. Peter also required them to wear European-style clothes instead of the old Oriental Russian robes. He persisted with these reforms despite many protests. To make women more equal in the society, Peter wrote a bill that freed them from forced marriage. Peter also made it an expectation for Russian nobility to hold European-style tea parties and social gatherings instead of the more barbaric celebrations that they were accustomed to. One of Peter's main goals was to gain access to the Baltic Sea in the north and Black Sea in the south. The only problem was that Sweden controlled this territory. So in 1700, Peter started the Northern War with Poland and Denmark as allies against Sweden. The war lasted for 21 years and resulted in Russia taking a big part of Swedish territory. This connected Russia to European trade routes, which made cultural exchanges easier. As a result of winning the Northern War, Russia was recognized as an empire on November 2nd, 1721. On that day, Peter was acclaimed Father of the Fatherland, Peter the Great, and Emperor of all the Russians. During the course of the war, Peter established St. Petersburg to strengthen Russia's presence on the Baltic Sea. This city was going to be the window to the west for Russia and the most magnificent city ever built in the course of Russian history. The capital of Russia was moved to St. Petersburg from Moscow in 1732. Peter moved it because he claimed the musty air was too hard to breathe in Moscow, which means that it was too conservative for him there. It was not easy building the new capital of Russia. The land that Peter acquired from the Northern War was boggy and swampy. He even created a rule that anyone who wanted to enter St. Petersburg had to bring a boulder with them. This helped speed up the construction and make St. Petersburg a spectacular city. It became, and still remains, the cultural capital of Russia. St. Petersburg had some of the best schools, factories, theaters, and museums of its time. The biggest museum is a Hermitage, which is the fourth largest museum in the world and used to be Peter the Great's Winter Palace. When Peter the Great died on February 8, 1725, he was still not finished building St. Petersburg. Peter is buried in the Peter and Paul Cathedral, which is located in the city that he built from nothing in the middle of a swamp. St. Petersburg is arguably Peter the Great's most influential legacy.